Hi everyone, and welcome to Storytime with Alex. Due to a technical difficulty, chapter 29, which I'd recorded the other day, got completely deleted. So I'm recording that again now. Try to remember what happened in chapter 28. Oh, they saved Sophie Bazette from her crumbling home, and it ended with Trevor Dietz falling asleep while reading the next part of his Nazi zombie graphic novel. Oh dear. Chapter 29. Oh, Supernatural Night Terror by John Passarella. Also, did I say I'm experimenting recording this just directly on the YouTube app? So we'll see how that goes. That's why it all looks different. You can see more of my toiletries. Ignore them. Chapter 29. Dean followed Bell Street eastward with a sense of deja vu, passing the intersection where they'd witnessed a pack of velociraptors hunt a Honda Civic driven by Paul Haynes. The downed utility pole had been patched to restore the lines, but was still a repair in progress. And when Dean turned onto Arcadia Boulevard, he once again saw police cars in the middle of the street and Nazi zombies looking for meals on legs. A full block short of the nearest zombie, Dean swung the Impala onto the shoulder of the road to allow enough time to raid the trunk of the car for extra ammo. Twisting around to face Sophie in the back seat, Dean said, "Stay in the car. Lock the doors." "My ankle has swelled like a balloon," she said. "I don't think I'm going anywhere under my own power." "Just as well," Sam said. "This will get messy." As Dean and Sam circled to the back of the Impala, Sophie double-checked the locks. Inside the trunk, Dean opened a case with spare magazines for their guns and handed 2 to Sam, taking 2 more for himself. In the distance, he heard the staccato pops of gunshots mingled with hysterical screams. They ran south along Arcadia. Dean tracked left and right for concealed zombies. He didn't want a repeat of his last close encounter. Behind a chalk-smeared sandwich board, a young Nazi officer in a white summer tunic turned towards them, staggering into their path. A loop of intestines dangled from a nasty abdominal wound. Dean raised his arm, braced his hand, and put a round through the zombie's forehead. Adding to the chaos, several people slipped out of stores and restaurants, yelling and screaming as they raced away from the undead abominations. A shrieking woman picked up her young crying daughter and lumbered awkwardly down the street on a broken heel. An overweight man wearing a business suit and gripping a briefcase in both hands tripped and fell, breaking the briefcase and barely managing to escape from a zombie soldier's clutching fingers. The man scrambled away on hands and knees until he could regain his feet and flee. Papers fluttered in his wake. In the middle of the street, an older field marshal in a full-length leather trench coat spotted them and lumbered into their path. Sam drilled around through his eye. "Dean," Sam said, "these aren't just Nazi zombies." Dean nodded. "They're the same Nazi zombies we already killed." "Regenerated," Sam said, "like the Charger each night. Night Hag's playing her golden oldies until she burns out the Dreamer." 3 soldiers in green helmets and uniforms rose from behind the cover of an open police cruiser door with blood and gobbets of flesh dripping from their cracked and jagged teeth. Dean shot one under the chin. Sam caught the other 2 with headshots. As they passed the police cruiser, they stopped. The zombies hadn't taken cover behind the cruiser. They'd been feeding. The ravaged body of Darren Nash, the portly Fremont Ledger reporter who had been interviewing people in CJ's diner, lay sprawled on the ground, missing half his throat and large portions of his upper arms and thighs. One of his eyes was missing, along with part of his cheek. The other eye stared lifelessly into the night sky. His notebook, now spattered with drops of blood, was clutched in his hand. Several pages flapped in the breeze, flashing the details of a story he hadn't lived to tell. "I did not need to see that," Dean said, and turned away from the corpse. "Wait a minute, Dean," Sam said, catching his brother's arm. Dean looked back. "What?" Then he saw. The fingers of the empty hand twitched. Then the head lolled to the side. The remaining eye moved slowly in its socket until it located them. Moaning, the reporter pushed himself up with his bloody arms and slowly climbed to his feet. His head hung to the side from his ruined throat. Uttering a wet grunt, he staggered one step toward Dean, then another, reaching out with straining fingers. Seriously. Perception is reality, Dean said. Yeah, I know. He aimed his gun, the end of the barrel less than a yard from the man's forehead. Without a second thought, he pulled the trigger, blasting half the reporter's brain and the back of his skull from his head. Hey, they shot Nash, a voice called. Dean turned. A Hispanic Colorado State Patrol officer pointed from him to Sam with the barrel of his gun. Drop your weapons, he commanded. They're FBI, Valdez, Officer Wilde said. Watch, look out, Sam called. Valdez turned around and stood face to face with a ravenous SS officer in a black uniform, peaked cap and swastika armband. They stood too close together for the others to take a clear shot. The state cop shoved his firearm into the gut of the Nazi zombie and fired round after round to no effect. The zombie ignored the abdominal wounds and ripped a chunk out of Valdez's throat. Blood sprayed from a torn artery, but Valdez continued firing until he exhausted his magazine. The zombie clutched Valdez by the shoulders and continued to tear into his flesh, even as his own midsection separated above his hips, his legs falling sideways. The upper torso of the zombie rode the state cop to the ground, continuing to eat long after the light had faded from Valdez's eyes. Officer Carrassi, gun drawn, ran up beside Wilde and looked down. Oh, God. Spinning away, he bent over and vomited. Wilde walked up to the feeding zombie, aimed her weapon at the back of his head, but averted her gaze from Valdez's remains as she pulled the trigger. Dean and Sam joined the cops. Now, Valdez, Dean said, or he'll come back as one of them. I can't, she said, and turned away from them. Dean looked down at the bloody state cop lying beneath the truly dead zombie's torso. His eyes were wide open and unblinking. Poor bastard, Dean said, and took the shot. More screams sounded, coming from a nearby Italian restaurant, one they had already passed, Mama Fracci's. Sam cast a grim look at Dean. The zombies are inside, he called, running toward the restaurant. Two bodies crashed through the plate glass window, a Clayton Falls man wrestling with a Nazi soldier whose jaw snapped repeatedly so hard they could hear the teeth striking each other from 15 feet away. The soldier's hand had clawed the man's face, but so far he'd managed to hold the snapping teeth at bay with a firm grip on the soldier's hair. If the soldier noticed or cared that his scalp was slowly tearing away, he showed no sign of it. Sam strode forward and swung his booted foot at the soldier's head, connecting just under the jaw and elevating the zombie's torso enough to get off a clean shot through his temple. He looked down at the relieved restaurant patron. "Were you bit?" he demanded. The man climbed hastily to his feet, ran his hands over his arms and gingerly touched his face and neck. No, I don't think so. Scratched, not bit." "You're lucky," Dean said. "Now go home." "My wife," the man said. "She went to the restroom before those things appeared out of nowhere. She's still in the restaurant." "We'll handle it," Sam said. When Dean and Sam entered Mama Fracci's, they saw the problem. A dozen patrons were trapped in the back corner of the place, surrounded by at least as many zombies. Some civilians cowered against the wall, backs turned, whimpering in fear, while another yelled hysterically for somebody to please God do something. But a few diners held chairs up, like lion tamers in a circus, jabbing the chair legs at the zombies each time they tried to grab somebody. Because the zombies were impervious to pain, they took the abuse and continued to edge closer to their intended victims. Wilde and a few other cops entered the restaurant behind the Winchesters and took in the situation. "More than last time," Wilde observed. "Headshots," Dean said for the benefit of the new cops. "Not as easy as it sounds," Sam said softly to Dean. The difficulty was that the restaurant patrons were behind the zombies. One miss or a through-and-through shot, and they would kill or maim innocent people. "Guess we get up close and personal," Dean said. He crossed the restaurant with Sam beside him. The cops followed, spreading out to avoid friendly fire and seemingly reluctant to tangle with zombies. Dean grabbed the first zombie soldier by the collar and yanked him backwards. At his side, Sam had a clean line of fire and took it, splattering zombie brains over a watercolor map of Italy. Then Sam pulled back the zombie closest to him, and Dean took the shot from the opposite direction. When Dean killed a third soldier, he saw a young officer in a white tunic. Dean spun the man around. No! Sam saw it too. The loop of intestine hanging from the abdominal wound. Same damn zombie we killed outside. Dean shoved the white-clad officer into a round table draped in a red and white checkered tablecloth and shot him in the brainstem. You know what this means, Sam said. Running on a frigging treadmill, Dean responded. The Winchesters backed away from the zombies. Dean turned to Officer Wilde. You know what to do. She nodded. But instead of grabbing a zombie, she removed the extendable baton from her belt and snapped it open. Stepping forward, she whipped it across the head of the nearest zombie, the greying field marshal with a full-length leather trench coat. The old man staggered sideways, but she'd commanded his attention. Turning to face her, he bore down on her, arms raised to grab her even as he opened his hungry maw to bite. Carassi moved to the side, mirroring the Winchester's technique, and blew the field marshal's brains out. The other cops took out their batons and joined the fight. With the situation basically in hand, the Winchesters retreated to the front of the restaurant. They're regenerating minutes after we kill them, Dean said. She's playing with us. We waste time attacking the symptoms, Sam added, not the cause. They heard more screaming outside and ran back into the street. Dean looked north and south for the source of the cry. His eyes locked on a black-clad Nazi SS officer standing hunched over beside the Impala. No! Dean yelled and sprinted to his car. No! I'm too late, he realized with horror. Too late. Sophie Pizzette had been pulled through the broken side window and was thrashing in the SS officer's arms, one of which looked broken in several places from punching it through the window. Behind the black-clad Nazi zombie, Sophie's body was obscured. Dean hesitated, holding his gun extended at eye level to make sure Sophie wouldn't be in the line of fire. When he saw her head flop down near the zombie's elbow, he fired a high shot, catching the undead officer in the back between his hunched shoulder blades. The zombie straightened, twisted his head around to look back over his shoulder. Seeing the satisfied grin on the zombie's face, with fresh blood staining his jagged teeth and dripping from his chin, Dean lost it. Roaring in anger, Dean emptied his magazine, firing round after round into the zombie's face until his magazine was empty. He ejected the spent magazine, slammed another into the grip, released the slide and continued to fire so he could blast that evil grin all the way to hell. With nothing much left above the stump of his neck, the zombie SS officer released his victim and swayed side to side. Lunging forward, Dean kicked the zombie in the chest, knocking him clear of Sophie's prostrate form. No, 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 Dean whispered as he knelt beside her. Gently, he turned her over and flinched when he saw her white blouse soaked with blood. Her throat had been torn open, much of the flesh gone. Above and below her collarbone, chunks of flesh had been ripped out with such force that the clavicle itself was fractured in 2 places. Her dark, tousled hair was sticky and matted with blood, and her eyes were wide open, seemingly caught in a moment of terror or disbelief. Sophie, Dean looked away, unable to face that accusatory stare. I'm so sorry. Dean eased her body to the ground, stood up, and backed away. Dean. Sam was beside him. Sammy, I can't, man. Dean turned his back. Sam understood. Dean heard his boots scuff against the asphalt as he took a step towards Sophie's body. Squeezing his eyes shut, Dean waited for the sound, anticipated the sound, but the sudden crack still felt like a body blow. It's done, Sam said. His hand fell on Dean's shoulders and he squeezed. Dean, we will kill this night hag bitch, Sam said. I promise. Dean nodded. He took a tarp from the trunk and laid it over her body, while steadfastly averting his gaze from her face. When he returned to the driver's side of the Impala, he heard a low, menacing growl. Stepping to the side, he spotted the large grey wolf crouched behind the car, its snout curled back to reveal impressive fangs in a foaming mouth. Don't even think about it, Dean muttered. He pulled his gun and fired a round right between its glowing amber eyes. The wolf dropped to the ground and vanished. Other wolves approached from the left and right, slinking out from the shadows between the commercial buildings on Arcadia. With Sam covering the west side of the street and Dean taking the east, They brought down the wolves one after one. To kill the wolves, headshots were a luxury, not a necessity, but Dean had the idea that a wounded and incapacitated rabid wolf might be better than a dead one. If they're not dead, maybe they won't regenerate, he pointed out. The dead ones vanished, but tonight the truly dead zombie corpses weren't disappearing as they had the previous night. The zombie manifestations were stronger somehow, having a permanence the wolves lacked, so far. When an ambulance rushed down the street, Dean flagged the driver down by waving his FBI credentials and led one of the paramedics to Sophie's body. "Take care of her," he instructed. "But she's already—" Sam caught the man's arm and whispered fiercely, "Get her out of the street before the wolves get her." The man looked down at Sam's hand gripping his arm, and the gun held in a white-knuckled grip in the other, and nodded. "Sure, no problem." "Good," Sam said. Dean drove in silence back to the diner, jaw clenched, hands tight on the steering wheel. No more chasing symptoms, he thought. We will find you and end you. Ooh, and that is the end of that chapter. How very exciting. Let's see whether they can find Trevor Dietz and wake him up before his zombies kill anyone, and before he gets turned into a husk. We will find out.